welcome to the tutorial of my newest pattern, the TriBeca tote. TriBeca was named for the 3 ways it could be made, which allows for 3 totally different finished looks. The first is the full panel option, which has a seamless exterior and a beautiful finished look to the bag. Second is the half panel, which allows you to incorporate different fabrics or even textures. And the third option is the block style, where the design options are literally endless. Don't be alarmed by the length of this tutorial. I'm actually making 2 different bags in this video. I wrote this pattern so that the TriBeca can be made 100% from cotton or even canvas. So the first part of this tutorial, I'm making a bag from quilting cotton. The second half of the video, I'm using vinyl and vinyl accent pieces. If you purchased the pattern, thank you so much. I really hope you enjoy it. If you're on the fence because you already have 95 tote patterns, I totally get it. I hope you enjoy this video as well and appreciate you watching. I've sectioned the tutorials into chapters to make navigating it much easier, so let's jump right in. I want to talk a bit about the pattern piece key. It is sectioned off based off of the style that you are making as well as the fabric that you are using. So this top section here is going to be the main print on the exterior. I first want to review the pattern pieces for my full panel exterior. I'm going to be cutting 2 pattern piece A. This is pattern piece A, and this is my vinyl, so I cut 2 pieces out of that. For the half style, I have 2 pieces of pattern piece B. I also have 2 pieces of pattern piece D, which is the exterior bottom. And with the exterior prints, I did add some pictures to kind of show you or remind you what you're going to be cutting out on this pattern piece. So I have 2 for the top, 2 for the bottom. Now for style, see, I have this blocked out because I added some measurements on here. The pattern key says to cut out 4 blocks. So I'm going to be using this cotton fabric. So I have 2 blocks in each of those prints. These 2 will be on the front, and then these 2 will be on the back. I do have a little note here. If you're using cotton for the exterior, you definitely want to interface it to give it some structure. There is no interfacing notes here, which is why I added it here. Now my preference is 1 layer of SF101 and 1 layer of fusible fleece to each of your pattern pieces. Now you can either make the interfacing the same size as our block pattern, or you can reduce the size of your interfacing so that it does not get sewn in your seam allowance. The SF101, I like to take it to the entire edge, so I will use my pattern piece for the SF101. For the fusible fleece though, I do like to cut about a 1/2 inch short on each side. So if you just reduce the block 1 inch on one side and then 1 inch on the bottom, when you center it, it will allow you to reduce that bulkiness in your seam. Next, we're going to move down here. We have our green section and a purple section. If you are using any kind of vinyl accents in your bag, then you want to use this section. If you are making this bag 100% out of cotton and you have no vinyl accents, then you want to use this list over here. And just like up top, it tells you how many pieces to cut out of each pattern pieces, as well as the material that you're cutting out. Now the pattern does not come with a pattern piece for your shoulder strap. There are measurements that are suggested in the pattern piece section. I want to talk a little bit about how I handle my shoulder straps whenever I am making a bag for the first time. Once I have finished completely the exterior and interior and have that sewn together, and I also have my hardware attached to the bag, I grab my measuring tape and then I actually choose what size I want my shoulder strap, and I'll show you how I do it. I think I bought this at the dollar store, so it's pretty inexpensive. I'm going to take one end and I'm going to thread it through where my hardware is, and I am going to bring it up 1.5 inches. I'll clip that in place. And then I'm going to take this and thread it through the other side. I'll lay it down so it's a little bit easier to show you. Now at this point, I just kind of pick a starting block and I clip it together, and then I can either go higher or lower depending on where I want the bag to sit. So this is a pretty high shoulder strap, so I'm probably going to come down to about here. I will clip this in place, and then I'll take it and I'll try it on my shoulder. If I want it shorter, I'll just thread this up more. If I want it longer, I'll let it go up a little bit higher. Let's see, I'd probably want it a little bit shorter. I'm a short gal. And then clip it in place. So once you've decided that this is the right length, this is how I want my bag to sit, then what you'll do is you'll look on the interior from where your hardware sits. You'll go up 1.5 inches, and that's how long you want to cut your shoulder strap. So this sits here. I want to go up 1.5 inches, so I will cut my strap 33 inches for this particular bag. It's going to be a little bit different for every single bag, just dependent on how your hardware is. So if I wanted it at this length, I would cut my straps 33 inches, and that's what I would use for my shoulder strap. The reason why we're taking into account an extra 1.5 inches on the side is because that's where our fold is once our shoulder strap is attached. Let's talk briefly about the interfacing for this bag. The interior main panels are interfaced with SF101. It is the full size of the pattern piece. The interior bottom is also interfaced with SF101, and it is the full size. The exterior bottom has a piece of Peltex, and that is centered, so you will have clearance on all 4 sides, and that way we are not sewing the Peltex into our seam allowance. Lastly, we have our vinyl strap attachments, and they get a piece of Decaville light, and that is also centered in when we adhere it to the vinyl. Now I went ahead and interfaced all of my pattern pieces. This is for the cotton only bag, and I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. So these are my bottom pattern pieces for the tote that I'm making. This is my interior. This is my exterior. So I'm using this as the bottom of my lining. I went ahead and interfaced that with 1 layer of SF101. For the exterior cotton bag, I went ahead and interfaced that with 1 layer of SF101, and then I interfaced that with my fusible fleece. This is what our connectors should look like once they are interfaced. The Decaville goes right in the center. Our zipper end, the Decaville goes right in the center. This is the zipper panel for our cotton. So if you notice, the Decaville lines up with the longest line on this pattern piece, right along the bottom, and then it's centered there. So there's the same amount of space here as well as here. And that is done on all 4 of those. We're going to start with our half. What we want to do first is lay our pattern pieces, the top piece and the bottom band. We're going to flip the bottom piece up, and we are going to clip those together. We're going to do the same thing for the other side. So one is going to be our front, one is going to be our back. There we are. Now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. We're going to sew these together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, I have my panel clipped together. I have also drawn a line 3/8 inch in from the edge, and this is going to be my sewing guide. You can do it on this side or you can do it on this side, completely up to you. My table doesn't have a guide. A lot of people's like throat plates do have a little guide here that tells you how far to go out to sew with a certain seam. Mine doesn't have that. If when you are finished putting your bag together and the inside and outside don't fit together, sometimes it could be this step right here. So just take an extra second, draw yourself a little line if you haven't been sewing for 100 years or if you don't have it on your sewing machine. The next step is going to be to open this up so that way we can do a top stitch so that this lays down nice and pretty. You can fold it to where the bottom fold is showing and top stitch here, or you can fold it this way And you can do a top stitch along this top where you see the folded top. It's totally dependent on you. It's just the difference of how your seam lays. So if your seam lays to the right, when you push this down, you're going to get the bottom. If your seam lays to the left, when you push this down, you're going to top stitch along this top. So it's totally preference. I usually do the bottom. And we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we are. That's what it should look like once it's done. And then we're going to do the exact same thing to the other panel. Done. So now the main print on our exterior matches our pattern piece A, which is the start of making this bag. Now, if you are making the block style bag, you want to first lay them out however you want it to look once we're done. One is going to be the front, one is going to be the back. And what we are going to do is we are going to flip them right sides together and we are going to sew them with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So this is the way I want my bag to look, or the front of my bag to look when I'm done. So I'm going to fold that, line everything up, clip them together, and then sew them with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I went ahead and drew a line which is 3/8 inch from the edge of my fabric. And if you are new to sewing, or if you haven't been sewing for a while, this is a good idea, just so you know everything lines up once we're done. If when you are sewing your interior to your exterior and they do not line up, a lot of the times it's the step right here. So if you do not have the measurements on your throat plate for your seam allowance, go ahead and just draw yourself a little guide. We're going to back stitch when we start and when we stop. Next, we're going to go ahead and top stitch. Now, if you are using cotton, the easiest way to do this is take this to your ironing board, open up your seam, press it nice and flat, and then iron that down. If you are using vinyl, this is going to be a little bit stiffer, so it might be a little bit harder to get this just to lay flat. You can add a piece of double-sided tape along this side of your seam and then press that in place, and then add a piece of double-sided tape on this side of the seam and press it in place so that it stayed open. We're going to be top stitching along this side and then top stitching along this side on the front. So we want to make sure that we are catching each side of that seam when we are sewing our top stitch. We are going to top stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is the distance between the seam and the fabric. There we are. That's what it should look like once we're done. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing with the other panel. I find that with the cotton, I can just kind of press it with my hand and then just make sure it's open when I'm sewing by going along the back and making sure that it's nice and flat. There we are, and that is the first step to making the tote bag with a block style. Next, we're going to finish the rest of the exterior of the bag. And these next couple of steps, it does not matter what fabric you're using or what style, whether you're using the block, the full, or the half. And it doesn't matter if you're using vinyl or all cotton interior. The next step is going to be to add the bottom to the exterior. So grab one of your exterior prints. You are going to mark the center of the panel. I don't need to do that because my center is the seam. And then you want to grab your exterior bottom piece that has been interfaced. This is my cotton. And we are going to fold it in half and find the center. So I'm just going to fold it in half lengthways and add a little notch to the center, just like that. And then I'm going to line the center of my bottom piece to the center of my panel piece. And again, it does not matter which style you're using. Fold this in half, find your center, add your bottom down, matching up those center marks, and then we're going to sew this together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Next, what we're going to do is we are going to take this seam and follow it all the way down this side, and we're going to cut out that material. You can use a ruler if you'd like. So you can just line that ruler up to where you stitched your line and then mark that out on both sides. And then we are going to cut up and then over. Just like that. We're going to do that on both sides. So cut up to your stitch line and then follow that all the way down. That's what it should look like. Now what we're going to do is we are going to open this up and we are going to top stitch along the bottom. So your seam should be to the right and your bottom is going right over top of that. And we're going to sew this down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just like that. And then we're going to grab our other panel and we are going to do the exact same thing. So lay that down if you haven't already. Mark the center of the bottom. Line up the center of your bottom. Clip that in place. And then we're going to sew that together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. We already drew our seam allowance, so we don't have to worry about making sure it's right. There we are. And then just like before, we're going to go ahead and cut out the sides. You can trace it down. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. There we go. So we have these edges cut out as well. Now we're going to open this up and we're going to do a top stitch along the other side of the bottom. And again, we're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance to do our top stitch. And that's just going to catch that seam underneath. We're catching that seam underneath when we're sewing that down. So this is what it should look like. And then now what we're going to do is we are going to fold the front two panels so that they touch so that we can sew down along the side. Now before doing this, if you want to draw your seam allowance just like before, while it's still open, go for it. There we go. Now we're going to fold this in half, get this nice and lined up. There we go. So we have our sides folded and clipped together, and we're going to sew this down with a 3/8 inch seam allowance on both sides. Okay, and then next what we're going to do is we are going to open up our side and sew that to the bottom. I like to open up my seam when I sew that so it's nice and flat. The side should match the bottom perfectly because of us trimming down that seam allowance. So now we're going to go ahead and sew that together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to go ahead and open this one up so that way it's ready for me when I am ready for it. The exterior is done at this point. If you'd like, you can open up your side seam at the top and you can base that down. And if you're using vinyl, I do recommend that. This is cotton, so I don't think that it's necessary, but it will be a little bit more beneficial and it'll help us when we put the interior and exterior together towards the end of the project. Now what we're going to do is prep the end of our zipper. This has been interfaced already. I want to start by adding just a couple of snips to the corners. I'm only going down about an 1/8 inch, no more than a 1/4 inch. And I'm just going to do that along all 4 corners. We're going to wind up gluing the sides over our Decaville light. And that's going to make this pattern piece both sturdy as well as have a finished edge. I'm going to take my Fabri-Tac glue and I'm just going to put some along the exposed fabric. Now this is only needed if you are using all cotton for the inside. If you are using vinyl, that is going to be done up a little bit differently. Grab some clips. I like to start on the long edge, so I'm going to just push that in, and you're going to fill that Decaville when you push it in. You want the edge of your cotton to line right up to the edge of that Decaville. I'm going to add probably just 2 clips on this long side, and then do the same thing over here. Now what we're going to do is start rounding the corners, and the way that I like to do that is just to push it in a little at a time and grab it with my other fingernail. So I'm pushing it in with this and then I'm grabbing it with this fingernail. And you're going to see a couple of pleats on the bottom. That's okay. And then once we get that corner done, I like to add a clip. Push the side in so you fill that side, and then we're going to do the same thing over here. Pleat and grab it with your fingernail, add a clip, and then just keep doing that all the way around. So pleat, clip, sometimes you have to lift up your clips to add more fabric in, that's okay. There we go. And then now I'm just going to set this aside to dry, but that is going to be our zipper end. Since we have our glue out, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with our connectors or the attachments. Now we're going to add a notch about every 1/8 of an inch all the way around. The more that you put in here, the more that your fabric is able to flare open so that you get a really good defined curve. I want to start right here and end right here. So I'm going to be clipping the fabric all along these curves. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to trim up the sides with my pinking shears. Now this is just to get a little bit of extra fabric out of there so I don't have to worry about a lot of those pleats on the back like we did with our zipper end. If you do not have pinking shears, that's totally okay. Just like to clip around the corners. I want a 1/4 inch between where the decaville is and where my clips end. So I'm going to leave behind a 1/4 inch fabric here, and I'm going to clip all the way down. Now for this side, I like to add some glue on the decaville light, just because the fabric, the cotton fabric, is so thin. And where I added my slots, it's really hard to get glue there. So I'll just add it around the edge. I'm going to press this side in, add a clip. And the goal is to press the fabric so that it ends right along the edge of that decaville. We're using that decaville as our template. So I'm going to push in, fold over, and clip it in place. And just keep going around till that's done. And I'm going to stop right before I get to that curve. We're going to handle our side curves at the end. So come up here, get this little side, and keep going. This can be messy. You might get some glue on your fingers. But the good thing about Fabri-Tac, I find if I just roll it, it comes right off. It dries pretty quickly on your skin. There we go. Now that we've come to the center, it's pretty easy. We're just going to push that fabric into that glue and then add some clips. Flare that out. Looks like my glue is dry just a little bit, but that's okay. One more clip. Now, if your glue's dried and it's not folded correctly, just grab something sharp and kind of pull that away. There we go. So that is what our connector or attachment looks like. We're going to set these aside to dry. Now our zipper panel is going to be done the exact same way that our zipper end and our attachments are done. We are just folding our cotton fabric over the decaville light so that it retains its shape and clipping it in place. So I'm going to add glue. It doesn't matter whether you add it directly to your cotton or whether you add it to your decaville. It's really preference. All right, we're going to start with the corners. So we have an angled edge on the top 2 corners. We're going to start by pushing that in, just like that, pushing that into the glue. Then we're going to go ahead and grab our side, fold that over. You can add a clip if you want. And then we're going to fold this side over, just like that. That's going to give us a finished edge on our zipper panel. We're going to do the same thing over here on this side. So we're going to start by pushing our fabric right until we feel the corner of that decaville, and then press it down. Press in our side into our glue, and then fold that top over, just like that. And again, if you want to add a clip, you can. And then we're going ahead and press the rest of the cotton into that glue. Just like that. So that way when it's done, we have a nice finished edge on 3 of the 4 sides. This side that here does not have any fabric on it. That's actually going to be sewn into the seam, so you are not going to see that. You are going to see our short 2 sides, and then the side that has the fold on it. And that's going to give us a nice pretty finished zipper panel using cotton. And we're going to do the exact same thing with the other 3. Now we have our 2 pieces of fabric for our interior slip pocket. If your fabric is directional, then you want to place them right sides together, going the same way. This is kind of directional. I'm going to use this as the top. You want to line those up. You can pin or clip this in place. We're going to sew around the entire edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we are going to leave about 3.5 inches opening at the bottom so that we can turn this right side out. There we are. So here's my bottom. I'm going to start here. Sew all the way around and then stop up here. You want to back stitch when you start and when you stop. Coming back to the beginning. So what I like to do is just place my finger where I need to stop. You can also mark it. Back stitching is going to be very important when you start and when you stop, because we are going to be turning this right side out, and sometimes the stress of opening this could pop those stitches where you started and where you stopped. So make sure you give an extra back stitch. Before we turn this right side out, we are just going to clip the excess fabric outside of our corners. I like to go as close to my stitch as possible without cutting through. Let me see if I can show you up close. I don't know if that'll pick it up. There we are. The stitching is white, so it's kind of hard to see. Next, we're going to turn this right side out. I like to just put my thumb into the corners and then press it out with my finger. I'm going to grab something sharp to press out those corners. I like to use a little screwdriver. I know there's tools that you can actually buy for this. I am cheap. And I just like to go with very light pressure. I do not want to poke through my stitches. I just want a really crisp corner. You can also press down your side along the seam along the side. Now we're going to take this to the ironing board and we are going to press out our seams. The bottom seam, usually if you just tuck your fabric in and give it a little tug, the seams will align where that open fabric is. If not, sometimes just rolling it out a little bit with your fingers will make sure everything lines up. So we have our pocket at our ironing board. I just like to give that a little roll so that it's nice and straight. I love steam. And then do the same thing to the short sides. There we are. So the only thing we have not ironed down is our opening on the bottom. Going to press in our fabric, give that a little tug, make sure that it is a nice straight line. Okay, so the opening of our pocket, oops, sorry for the bouncing. The opening of the pocket is down here. We're gonna sew a 3/8 inch seam allowance along the top. Back stitching when we start and when we stop. There we are. Now we're going to take one of our interior panel pieces. We are going to measure down 1.5 inches and we are going to center our pocket. So the stitch that we made along the outside of the top is going to be at the top of the pocket, making sure that it is centered, and it is 1.5 inches down from the top. We are going to sew along the side, the bottom, which is going to close up that opening, and then back up along the side. And we're going to sew this down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We are going to back stitch really well at the top when we start, and then on this top when we stop. That is where the pocket is going to get the most tension going in and out. So I just like to back stitch twice. I don't know if I mentioned we're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we are, our slip pocket is all done. Now what we're going to do to prep this for the next step is just fold this in half, and then on the bottom edge we are going to add a little notch just to indicate the center. And that's going to be helpful when we add the bottom pattern piece to the bottom of this panel. Let's set this aside and then we'll work on our zipper pocket for the interior. All right, I have my second panel as well as my 2 zipper pocket pieces. I'm going to set one of them aside, and then on the wrong side of one of them, I'm going to draw a box. We're gonna start by going down 3/4 of an inch. Sorry, that's my iron turning off. And then we are going to start 1 inch in on both sides. So I'm going to add a little mark there, come in 1 inch here, add a little mark. I'm going to connect those two. And then we're going to go down 1/2 inch from that line. We're going to come in 1 inch, add a mark, come in 1 inch this side, add a mark, and then connect those 2 lines. So we should have 2 parallel lines, and then we're just going to connect them at the side. Grab our interior lining. We are going to center our pocket piece 1/2 inch from the top, making sure that it is centered. And then I'm going to just add a couple of pins to keep this in place. Now what we're going to do is sew around the rectangle right along the lines that we drew. You can backstitch when you start. I don't. I'm going to be sewing over those first set of stitches, which is going to lock them in. back to the beginning, I stitched over those to lock them in. Now the next step is to cut a line. We are going to start a 1/2 inch away from here and a 1/2 inch away from here in the center. We're going to cut down the center, and then we're going to cut the corners at a Y. So take this, cut up here, and then cut down here. We want to get as close to those stitches as possible without actually cutting through them. So what I like to do to start is just fold this in half, start cutting in the center, just right here, and then cut up till I get that mark, and then cut in as close to the corner without cutting my stitches. And then turn it around and do the same thing over here. There we are. Now what we're going to do is thread our pocket through to the back. We're going to take this over to the ironing board so that we can get this pressed nice and flat. So once you pull the fabric through, you're going to get a little bit of a pull wanting it to go back to the front. That's natural. So what we're going to do is take it to the ironing board, make sure the top is pressed all the way out, and then fold over at the seam. Give that a nice press, and then we're going to do the same thing to the bottom. So I like to start with the top. Sometimes you can just press that seam down to get it to lay flat. It'll cooperate a little bit more with you. And then press the seam. I'm only pressing the very top, even though the bottom part of my pocket is poking out. We're going to roll the bottom down. I like to just roll it back and forth. Press that bottom seam down. And then I like to flip it over. Make sure it's nice and straight on the bottom. And then we're going to deal with our corners. Now if you see some puckering like this right here, that means that I did not get as close to the stitch corner as I could have. Unlike this one, it actually lays a lot more flatter. That means that I did get really close to those stitches. So if yours is too puckered where you cannot get this to lay flat, go back in and make sure that you snip a little bit closer to those stitches. So see how this one is a little bit flatter than this one? It's okay if it's not perfect. Fold it back over. Give it one more press with some steam. And then now what I'm going to do is add some double-sided tape along the long bottom edge, as well as the top edge. This is where we are going to be sewing in our zipper. So the tape is just going to hold the zipper in place while we sew it down. Take the tape backing off of the tape. We're going to lay our zipper depending on how you want your pull. If you want your pull to open from the left, you'll set it this way. If you want your pull to open from the right, you'll lay it this way. I want mine to open from the left. I'm going to have the pull on here an inch away from the edge. And then we're just going to center the zipper teeth in that box, and we're going to press down the tape. Incredibly important that you see your zipper pull in the box. Now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I'll probably reposition my zipper to make sure that it is nice and perfect. I want the same amount of zipper tape showing on this side as I have it on this side, which means I need to just move it down a little bit. And then we're going to sew along the outside with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. I like to widen my stitch length because this is both a functional and a top stitch, so I think a wider stitch is a prettier stitch. Going to pull my zipper pull out of the way. Trim my thread where I started. And then keep going. Come back to where I first stitched and back stitch really well. That is what it should look like. Now what we're going to do is we are going to lay our second zipper pocket piece right sides together. We are going to start by sewing up one side. We're going to sew along the top, and then we are going to sew along the other side. We are going to leave the bottom open. We are going to use this to turn our bag right side out. So what I like to do is just make sure that the bottom pieces line up. I'm going to flip the bag or flip the panel to where the bottom of the pocket is showing. We are going to sew this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I just like to make sure that my sides line up. Now we are not sewing our pocket to the main panel pieces. We are just sewing our two pocket pieces together. So we're going to sew up. Going to pull the top away. So that way I'm only looking at my two pocket pieces. And I just keep repositioning my pocket pieces to make sure that they're lined up. Back stitch when you start and when you stop. That is what it should look like. I'm going to trim down my seam allowance so that there is a 1/4 inch of material left behind. Make sure you do not cut through your lining material. There we are. So we have our pocket pretty much done. If you open it up, you should see the inside of the pocket. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to flip up the bottom about a 1/2 inch. And we're going to take it to the ironing board and just iron that nice and flat. That way we have a finished edge to our pocket. When we turn the bag right side out, we're going to have to sew this bottom up. And so flipping it out like this will give us a nice interior finish side to it once we're done. There we are. I went ahead and just pressed that pocket so it's nice and folded. Now we're going to mark the center bottom of the panel just like we did on the other one. So we're going to just fold that in half, add a little snip. So I have my zipper pocket panel, I have my slip pocket panel, and then now I have the bottom interior panel. I'm going to find the center of this by doing the same thing, just folding that in half, adding a couple of snips. You can also use a pen. Let's start with our slip pocket. Making sure that the opening of the pocket is at the top, we are going to take our bottom pattern piece. We're going to lay that right sides together. So the right side of the bottom, the right side of the panel piece. We're going to match up those center notches that we made, and then you can pin or clip this in place. I'm gonna add a couple of pins. And then we're gonna sew this together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And again, if you'd like to draw your 3/8 line, go for it. This sewing machine has my measurements here, so I don't necessarily have to do that. Next, we're going to trim down our seam just like we did on the exterior. So again, if you want to use a pen to travel the seam all the way down to the edges, you can. Because I have blocks, it's just easy for me to see where that seam ends. And then we're going to cut up and then do the same thing over here. We're going to take our other interior panel, which is the zipper pocket. I'm going to go ahead and fold up my pocket piece and clip that out of the way. When I'm sewing along the bottom, I don't want to accidentally catch my pocket piece. So I'm going to lay that right side up where the zipper is on the top. I'm going to take the material that we just sewed together and I'm going to place that right sides together. I'm going to match up the center of this bottom panel to the center bottom of the zipper panel. And then pin those in place. You can clip them if you'd like. And then we're just going to repeat that. We're going to sew them together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to open it up and cut along the sides. There we are. Now, just like we did with the exterior, we are going to fold our main panels right sides together, and we are going to sew along the sides of them with the 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm not going to pin or clip, I'm just going to hold them in place while I'm sewing. Back stitch when you start and when you stop. If you want to draw your seam allowance line, you are more than welcome to. There we are. I can unclip this now. And then again, just like with the exterior, we're going to open up the side and the bottom, match those together. You can open up your center seam, clip or pin them together, and then we're going to sew them with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Again, I'm just going to hold them in place. When I get to the center seam, I'm just going to open that up. There we are. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here on this side. Open it up, get it all nice and lined up, and then sew it down with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now for the inside lining, I actually like to trim down this side seam allowance to about 1/4 inch. It just gets rid of some of that extra material. There we go. Our inside lining is all done. We have a slip pocket on one side and a zipper pocket on the other side. If you'd like at this point, you can either iron or base stitch the top of the seam down so that way it's nice and flat when we combine the inside and outside together. Now we're going to work on our zipper closure. So I have my 4 zipper panels that we prepped earlier, as well as my zipper end. Everything is nice and dry. I'm going to take my clips off my zipper end. This is going to be folded in half. And what I want to go ahead and do, just to kind of prepare the piece so that it's not stiff, is just fold that in half, line up the top and bottom as well as the sides. And then I'm just gonna add a clip here and here. And that's just gonna go ahead and allow it to take shape while we're working on the zipper. Just fold that in half, clip it together, and then we're gonna set this aside. Let's start by prepping our zipper in. It is going to flare open nice and pretty when we're done. I'm gonna start by sliding on my zipper pull. You can also use a finished zipper for this. Now the side where it opens, which is this side right here, we're going to measure down 3/4 of an inch and make a mark. You can also clip it. It's going to be really hard to see with this black zipper, so I'm just going to mark it and then I'm going to clip it so I can show you a little bit better. So I'm just going to add a little snip where I made that mark. Just for visual purposes, you do not have to do this. Open it up the rest of the way. I'm going to grab some pins. I'm going to fold this down at that mark that we made and pinch it with my fingers. And while that's pinched down, I'm going to pull up the back so that it is perpendicular to that fold that we just made. And then I'm going to use a pin to keep that in place. There we are. So that is what it should look like. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So fold it at that mark, pinch it with your fingers, and then pull up the back so that it is perpendicular and add a pin. And then next what I'm going to do is sew along the edge with the folded end behind it, so that way I can remove the pin and it stays in place. And I just sew down and then back stitch all the way up just a couple times. So that is what it looks like without the pin, and then we'll do the same thing to this side. There we go. So now we have a nice curved edge. I'm going to go ahead and trim down my sides so that it aligns with the rest of the zipper tape. And then every time I cut a zipper, I like to hit it with my lighter just to kind of seal in those edges so that they don't fray. So we have our prepped zipper. I'm going to take my panel pieces and remove my clips. So essentially what we're going to do is with our folded side, the one that has a nice finished edge, that is going to be placed on one side, and then the side with the folded edge is going to be placed on the other side. So the side that has a raw edge is going to be furthest away from the zipper. I like to start it about 1/4 inch in from the end. Now what I like to do is place a piece of 1/2 inch double-sided tape along the side with the folded fabric in. I'm going to start that. I'm going to place it. Now I've placed it where I have 1/4 clearance here, 1/4 clearance here, and then 1/4 clearance here. That way when I'm sewing this together, I'm not going to be sewing through my double-sided tape. So I'm going to do that on 2 of my panel pieces. There we go. Let's remove the tape backing. So I like to place it where the zipper starts, about 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch below the tab, the side tab. Press that in place. So if you see, the edge starts here, I go in about 3/8 of an inch, and that's where I start my zipper. And I'm going to flip it around and do the same thing with the other side. The reason why I use 1/2 inch double-sided tape instead of 1/4 inch double-sided tape is because it's going to catch the back piece, and that's going to be able to be taped to it so it does not move around. There we are. So that's what it should look like. So at the back. So if you notice there's a little bit of exposed tape on both sides, that's going to catch this piece. So again, with our folded end, that's going to go on the zipper tape. The tape that does not, or the side that does not have a folded side, is going to match this one. So I'm just going to lay it down and match the front part. This is actually a little bit easier if we open up our zipper. Making sure not to pull our pull off. So line that up to the front piece and then press down, and that's going to stick in that tape so it doesn't move while we're sewing it. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Again, aligning the raw edge to the raw edge of this and then press it into the tape. There we are. So now what we're going to do is we're going to sew along the short edge, the long edge that is on the zipper, and then the other short edge. We're going to use a 1/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to do the same thing over here. Short side along the zipper and then the other short side. Sometimes I'll add a little clip to the bottom. That way it keeps me from accidentally pulling that pull off. And again, the way that we added our tape, and we are sewing with a 1/8 inch seam allowance, we will not be sewing inside of the tape. There we are. That's what one side looks like, and we're going to do the same thing over here. Back stitch when you start and when you stop. Sometimes I have to adjust, which is really easy because again it's just taped in place. There we are. Our zipper panel is almost done. The last step is just to add the end. So we want to have 3 inches from the edge of the zipper panel to the end. We want to cut this down 3 inches, which is about right here. So I'll just make myself a mark and then trim that little bit off. Let me see if I can find my mark. There we are. Again, I'm going to just hit this with the lighter. I did not do a great job of cutting that straight, which is fine. I can just melt it down so it's nice and straight. We're going to take our zipper end. You can choose which side you want to be visible, and then that is going to line up where you see the teeth of the zipper. So this is going to be the top of my zipper panel that's going to be showing outside of my bag. I'm just going to slide the zipper in all the way to the bottom of that fold. Clip it in place. And then we're just going to sew all the way around the outside with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Go nice and slow around your curve. I usually just use my hand wheel. It's such a small curve. There we go. Now our zipper panel is complete. What we want to do next on the wrong side of the zipper is mark the center of the panel. You can fold that over. The Decaville is going to make it just a little bit tighter, and if you don't want any folds on this, then you can just use a ruler to find the center. Just going to add a little notch to both sides. I'm going to set this aside. Now I have the exterior of my bag. I am using the block style for this, and so I don't need to note the center because I know it's right here. If you use the full panel or the half panel, go ahead and mark the center of the top. The easiest way to do that is just bring your seam together, measure all the way down, and add a notch on both sides. What I'm going to do next is we are going to take our zipper panel and we are going to be looking at it the wrong way. So we're going to see the back of the zipper. This is going to be teeth side down. On one edge of your exterior, you want to line up where we made the center of the zipper to the center of our panel and clip that in place. Let me do it like this so it's easier to see. So again, right now we're looking at the back of the zipper. There we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to open up the zipper panel. We are going to flip it to the other side. So to make sure that it is right, there's two ways. I actually like to flip it twice. So flip it once, flip it twice, and then it'll match up. Another thing that you can do is just bring it around to the other side. So holding it like this, we're going to bring it around, not moving it, to the other side. And again, line up the center of the zipper panel to the center of your exterior, and then clip that in place. All the way down. There we go. And we're just going to base this down with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. So this side is basted down. Lost my clip. And now this side is basted down. We're going to turn this inside out. Tucking in our zipper end. Make sure that's nice and tucked down. We're going to take our interior and turn that right side out. You also want to make sure that your zipper pocket is open. That is what we're going to use to turn this bag right side out. Now, to make sure that your zipper pulls are opening up the same way when the bag is completed, whichever side your zipper is when it's opened on your exterior is the same side that you want your interior pull. So my pull's opened on the left, this pocket is open and it's on the left. So we're just going to tuck that in. We're going to start by matching up our side seams and clipping those together. Going to just press open my side seams and add a clip. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. line up our sides, open up that seam, and then add a clip. And then now what we're going to do is make sure everything is tucked in perfectly. Now when you're clipping it together, you do not want the rounded edge of the outside of the bag because your inside lining is naturally going to be bigger than the outside. So when I'm connecting them along the sides, I like to make sure that the piece is nice and straight. I don't want it pressed out and I do not want it pressed in. So I'm going to keep it straight, add a clip, keep it straight, add a clip. Then I'm going to come over here to this side, do the same thing, nice and straight. And then when we meet up in the middle, if we did all of our sewing right with the correct seam allowance, everything should fit perfectly. And then we'll do the same thing over here. Again, make it nice and straight. We do not want it bowed out or in. Add a couple clips here. Come over here, do the same thing. And then it should match in the middle. And then now we're going to sew around the top with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. There we are. Now I'm going to turn my bag right side out through that pocket. I'm going to start by pressing in that one corner, coming over here, pressing in the other corner. I like to grab that corner and then just push and roll. If you go nice and slow, you don't have to worry about stressing out that pocket. The pocket width is wide enough to get this bag through without any stress. All right, we're going to tuck in the lining. I'm going to first start by sewing our zipper pocket shut. And we're just going to do that by lining up those folded edges that we created. You can pin it or clip it in place. I just kind of like to hold it. And then I'm sewing it with a heavy 1/8 inch seam allowance. Tuck that back in. Just getting that corner pressed in. Going to zip my pocket shut. And then the next step is to top stitch. So we're going to start with our sides. I like to just roll that until the seam is nice and perfect. I'm going to add a couple clips here. Same thing over here. Got a little piece of thread poking out. There we go. Next, what we want to do is we want to iron down our lining right below that zipper panel right here. We're going to be top stitching using the inside and going around, so we want to make sure everything is nice and lined up. So I'm going to tuck that zipper pocket, make sure it's pressed all the way down. Grab my iron, and then I'm just ironing down the inside. because we can't get any clips to make sure it's pressed down. We're going to be sewing with our zipper panel staying straight out like that, so we can't get any clips to make sure that our seam is nice and aligned, which is why we're going to use the iron. So I'm just rolling this side in, rolling this side down, holding it, and then just pressing it with the iron. That's going to make sure that your stitch line on the outside is the same as your stitch line on the inside. There we go. And then now we're going to go ahead and top stitch all the way around. I like to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to start on my side. Our strap attachments are going to cover up the side, so if we do our back stitching here, it's going to be covered up by the end. Go nice and slow. And as I'm sewing, I'm making sure that my seam at the top for the outside and the inside are nice and taut. So I like to grab it from the outside and then press it down from the inside. Just keep doing that all the way around. Our sides are a little easier because they have the clips in them. Just make sure that you're holding your zipper end out of the way. There we go. We can kind of see the top stitching outside here. We're coming back to the beginning. There we are. Clip my threads where I started and stopped. There we are. So the outside of our bag is all done. All right, let's go ahead and unclip our strap attachments. They should definitely be dry by now. Now what we're going to do with our strap attachments is just sew along the outside with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. I like to start on one of our edges. I do not start in the center. This is going to be attached to the bag like this. So one is going to be visible on the outside, one is going to be visible on the inside. Wherever I start and stop, which has the multiple layer of stitches, I usually put that in the inside. And so I'll normally start on just the bottom of one side. And then again, just go nice and slow. There's no rush. We're sewing all the way around, 1/8 inch seam allowance. Going nice and slow. There we go. Now what this is doing, it's sewing down our fabric on the inside. Even though it's glued down, we don't want this to come up. it's going to be attached to the bag like this with some rivets, and so the stitching as well as the rivets that we're going to use to attach this to the bag is going to prevent this from opening up so that this fabric on the inside shows. I'm going to do the same thing to this one. Okay, next we are going to be prepping our attachments for the bag. So we're going to grab our 2 D-rings. We're going to slide those over. The easiest way I find is just to fold this in half, slide this on. Now the flat part of the D-ring needs to be on the back, which means the curved edge is going to be visible on the top. We're going to line up the edges and then add a clip. Just 1 clip for now is fine. Do the same thing over here. Slide it on. The flat bar goes to the wrong side. Fold it over, line up those edges, and add a clip. Now we're going to be adding 3 rivets. We're going to add 1 on this corner, we're going to add 1 on this corner, and then we're going to add 1 to the top. It doesn't necessarily matter. I like to just get in the furthest corner close to the stitch line. So what I can do to make sure that they're nice and even is just put a ruler, add a mark on one side, add a mark on the other side. So it is going to be 3/8 of an inch away from each edge. And then it is going to go up 1/4 of an inch. So we're going to go up 1/4 of an inch, and then we're going to go inside 3/8 of an inch. Again, it really doesn't matter where you put it. We just want it as close to the edges as possible because this is going to be holding our connector down so that you don't get a chance to see inside where all of the ugliness is. Don't tell anybody. Now the top one is a little bit more important, where you place your rivet. We are going to go down 1 inch. Finding the center and making a mark. That's going to allow the clearance of the side of the bag, and I'll show you what I mean. Let me go ahead and do the same thing over here. So I'm just gonna eyeball it. Now with these clipped together, I'm going to punch out those holes. Make sure everything is nice and lined up. There we are. Let's start on this side that doesn't have the zipper in, just because it's going to be a little bit easier for me to show you. What we're going to do is take off the clip. We're going to open this up, and then we are going to slide it down so that the center of the attachment matches the center seam. We're going to transfer those hole marks from our attachment to the actual bag. So all I do is just put my pin in, move it around a couple times. Same thing over here. Sorry, my dogs are playing in the background. Same thing over here. Now you're not going to see these marks because we're going to place rivets in each one of these holes, so it doesn't matter what pen type that you use. And then now we're going to punch out all 3 of those holes. So as you see, I transferred the bottom 2 holes here, and then up here is where the 3rd hole is. Now I want to make sure that my lining is nice and flat, that it's not bunched up. And I'm just going to put my punch over each one of those holes, press through all layers of fabric. Same thing in the center. There we are. Decide which side that you want showing on the exterior of the bag, and then we're going to install the rivet. We're going to install the side of the rivet that has the post on it. There we are. So I have all 3 rivets placed in my attachment. This is the side of the rivet that has the post on it. We're going to line that up with the holes that we made on the bag. Press that through. And you can kind of see the edge of the post on the back. We're going to fold this over, match up those holes, and then add our rivet cap. And then do the same thing over here on this side. Sometimes when you move it around, it loses its hole, and that's fine. Just go back, push it through, and there is my little piece of rivet. I'm gonna pull this down. Everything should line up because we basically had everything folded together. Gonna add my rivet cap. And then do the same thing over here. There we are, so that's what it should look like. And then I'm going to set those rivets. There we are. So that's what the outside of it should look like, and then what the inside of it should look like. Now we're going to do the same thing on this side. We're going to unclip our attachment. We're going to line it up to the center side of the bag. Transfer those holes. Take that off. We're going to poke through all 3 of those holes. Now this side, it's just a little bit more challenging maneuvering around our zipper, but it's definitely doable. It's just mildly annoying. Poke through all 3. We need to decide which side is going to be on the exterior. I think I want this one to be on the exterior. So I'm going to put my rivets that have the post into each of these holes. Going to line that up to the exterior holes. Push the post through the interior. Flip this over, making sure that we have our hardware still on it. And then match that top hole. I always like to start with the top hole. It's just a little bit easier. And again, it's going to be mildly annoying to poke it through all 3 of those layers, but it's definitely doable. Add our backing. I think I heard one of my posts fall off. Find it on the inside. There we are. We found it through our little interior hole, and then we're going to lay over the attachment, add the rivet backing, and then do the same thing over here. Find that post, fold over our attachment, get that poked through, and then add the rivet backing. Then we're going to set all 3 of these. Just pull your zipper out of the way. And that's it. Our bag is all done. All we need to do is finish the shoulder strap, and I will show you how to do that next. Okay, I cut my pattern piece for my shoulder strap based off of what the patterns suggest. There is a section at the beginning of this video that shows you how to alter it if you would like to make sure it's the perfect size for you before committing to cut. Now what we're going to do with our strap first is fold it in half, wrong sides together, and we are going to press that with an iron all the way down. Then we're going to open that up and we're going to fold each side into that center, just like that. Iron that all the way down. And then we're going to open this up. We are going to center our fusible fleece on one of those folded edges. I usually like to do the edge that's closest to that center fold. You want to make sure that you have the same amount of space available on both sides. Now you can stop here with one layer of fusible fleece. I like a thicker strap, especially when I'm using cotton. So I cut out a second piece, and I'm also going to go ahead and center that on the other fold that's closest to that center line. Just like that. We're going to fold our sides back up. Now this is fusible fleece, which means that it has to be fused down. So I'm going to go ahead and run my iron over top of it. That's going to allow that fleece to adhere to my cotton. And then I'm going to fold it once more back on that center crease and iron that down. I'm using a lot of steam. Now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I am going to sew all sides. So we're going to sew the short side over here along the fold. Back up the short, back up the short side and then along the side that does not have a seam. I'm going to sew as close to the edge as possible or at a 1/8 inch seam allowance. I went ahead and sewed my shoulder strap up. So you're not going to be able to see it because I used white thread, but sew along our short ends and then sew down each side. There are a couple of ways that you can attach this to the bag. One way is to thread it through. We are going to do a double fold because we have a raw edge on these short sides. So you can fold it once and then fold it up again. You can sew along that fold or you can add a rivet to the center. Another option is to use a lobster clasp. You can thread one end onto the lobster clasp. You can fold this over again. Sorry, my phone's going off. And then add a rivet. That way your shoulder strap can be detachable. I'm going to go ahead and slide this through. We're going to do a double fold. So we will fold down. We're going to see 3/4 of an inch, and then we're going to fold it over again. That's going to cover up that raw edge. I'm going to add a clip to clip that in place. Now when I bring this over to the other side, I want to make sure I don't have any twist in it. So I'm just going to lay it right over and then just making sure it's nice and straight until we get to the other side. And then thread that through the D-ring here. And then do the same thing. I'm going to fold it up 3/4 of an inch and then fold it over again. I'm going to add a clip. Making sure everything is nice and lined up. I'm going to poke my hole right in the center of that folded square. Install my rivet. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Make sure everything is lined up. Punch through the center. Install my rivet. Go going to set that rivet in place. And set this rivet in place. There we are. And your cotton tote is all done. I really hope that you enjoy it as much as I do. I love this pattern. If you tried one with the blocks, try one of the other styles, either the full panel or the half panel. I really hope that you enjoy it, and I would love to see pictures of your finished product. We have our two slip pocket pieces. We are going to face those right sides together. Now, if your fabric is directional, you want to make sure that the top is here, the bottom is here. We are going to sew along the short edge along the bottom and then back up the short edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. We are not sewing across the top. So you can pin or clip these together. I'm just going to use a couple pins. We are back stitching when we start and when we stop. Now I'm going to trim the excess fabric outside of these bottom corners. I'm just going to get as close to that stitch line as possible without actually cutting my stitches. I like to use a little screwdriver when I poke out my corners. We're going to go ahead and turn this right side out. Having that big top opening is very beneficial to turning it right side out. We don't have to worry about fooling with a little opening. I'm going to use my screwdriver just to press out my seam, mainly my corner. I'm just using the smallest amount of pressure just to get as much of that fabric out as possible. Now I'm going to take this to my ironing board and I'm going to iron down my seam. So here's my open edge, here's my bottom edge. I like to place the bottom edge away from me, that way I can kind of roll it to make sure it's nice and flat and even. I use a little bit of steam, and then same thing here. I kind of just roll that down until everything lines up nice and even. And then lastly on this side. And just give it one more good press. Now the top that is open, we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we are going to baste along the top with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we are, our slip pocket is just about done. The last step is to add our accent piece, so go ahead and grab your vinyl and I will meet you back. We have our slip pocket as well as our vinyl accent piece. We are going to start by drawing a line down the center, lengthwise. Going to add a piece of 1/4 inch double-sided tape along the bottom as well as the top. This is just going to hold our pocket in place while we're sewing it. You can completely omit the double-sided tape and just use clips if you'd like. Now what I like to do is just take off the backing on one edge. We're going to line up our pocket a little short of that center line. Just like that. Take off the backing. And then fold that over. We are going to stitch along the bottom and then we are going to stitch along the top. So you can use a 1/8 inch seam allowance. I'm just going to get as close to the bottom as possible as well as close to the top. I start with the bottom, that's gonna hold that closed. Now that I'm looking at this closely, this looks like it's blue, like a navy vinyl, and I thought it was black, so joke's on me. There we are. So that's what it should look like once it's done. Now, if you have any overhang on this side, I have the tiniest amount of overhang. You can trim that down. I'm really not going to worry about it. We are going to grab one of our interior main panel pieces and we are going to center our slip pocket down 1.5 inches from the top. There we go, that's nice and centered. I'm going to add a couple pins just to keep this in place. And then we are going to sew along the edges with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. We are not sewing down the top. We are only sewing down the short edge, the bottom edge, and then this other short edge. We are not sewing down the top of the pocket. Give a really good back stitch at the top when we start, and then at the top when we stop. That is where the most stress of this pocket going in and out is going to be. So I actually like to just back stitch twice, just to lock those stitches in place. Get my clips out of here. See all those double stitches on the top? I really like to secure that because, again, going in and out of this pocket, this is where the stress is going to be the most. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mark the center bottom of this panel and then set it aside. And we are going to work on our zipper pocket that goes in the other panel. Okay, I have my 2 zipper pocket pieces. I'm going to take one of those pocket pieces, and if your fabric is directional, just lay it where the top of it is here and the bottom of it is here. We're going to take our zipper, teeth side up, place it along the top, and we are going to stitch this on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's all sewn on. Now we're going to take our other fabric piece, and if yours is directional, again, make sure that the top is here and the bottom is here. We are going to flip this side over where the teeth are showing, and we are going to line the top of our zipper to the top of our second pattern piece, and then sew this on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I gotta cut my zipper just a touch too big, which is fine. I can trim that down. There we are. So your pocket piece, when it's open and you see the wrong side of your material, you should see the zipper teeth or the right side of the zipper. When you see the right side of material, you should see the wrong side of the zipper. Now what I'm going to do is take this to the ironing board. I'm going to give it a little pull and press this down so it lays nice and flat. So just give it a little tug, hold it in place. Iron it down. You guys know I love the steam. Flip it over, do the same thing. There we go. Then we're going to set this aside and grab our zipper overlay. Now we have our second interior panel, and we also have our zipper overlay. We're going to turn the overlay to the wrong side, and we are going to add a piece of 1/4 inch double-sided tape along each long edge. This is just going to hold the overlay in place while we're sewing it down. Get that pressed in really good and then remove the tape backing. I did not press that down good. There we are. Now we're going to center our zipper overlay, so that is 1.5 inch down from the top of the panel and making sure that it is nice and centered. There we go, that is centered. I'm going to press that tape in. And sometimes you need to maneuver the bottom of this to make sure that your box in the center is the same size all the way down. It should be 1/2 inch. And then press that tape in. I'm going to sew along the outside of the overlay, getting as close to the edge as possible. Now when I start, I'm not going to backstitch. Instead, I'm going to pull my thread through. And when I stop, I'm not gonna backstitch. Instead, I'm going to pull my thread through. And that's going to make it look like a seamless row of stitching all the way around. So I like to start at the top. It really doesn't matter where you start. No back stitching. I mean, you can. This is your bag. If you've never tried it this way before, do it how you're comfortable. Anytime I try a new technique, I don't try it with a bag that I'm making for the first time. I actually don't usually try it with a bag. I actually just use some material that I'm not going to be using. Just some scrap material, and try it that way. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to pull my thread through where I first started sewing. If you give the thread on the back just a little tug, this little stitch will pop through. I grab it with the dull side of my seam ripper and pull those 2 threads through. And then I'm going to keep this out of the way while I'm sewing so I don't sew over it. Repositioning my overlay because it moved just a touch. Now my goal is to stop in the very first stitch that I started, which will give this that seamless look. There we are. And then just like the first one, if you give the thread a little tug, you'll see this little stitch pop up. And then we're going to grab 2 on each side and then just tie a knot. Sometimes I'll do a double knot. Not that it's necessary. The outside of this overlay is not really going to get a lot of attention or movement or tension placed on it. Then I like to just cinch that down. So let me show you. I don't know if the camera will be able to pick it up. This is where I started sewing and this is where I stopped sewing. So it looks, there's not a whole bunch of layered stitches. It looks a little bit more seamless. All right, now what we want to do is get the fabric outside of this box on the interior. So I'm going to just put my seam allowance in, do a little rip to get me started. You could also just fold it in half and do a little clip in the center to get started. Totally your call. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut all the way up to where I get inside of the box, where I first see the vinyl. And then stop there. I'm also going to tuck my scissors underneath that vinyl and do the smallest amount of snip. So this is the clearance between the edge of the vinyl and where this row of stitching is. And so I do not want to clip my stitches. If you don't feel comfortable going underneath your vinyl box, that's okay. Turn it around and then stitch, or cut, I'm sorry, but we do not want to cut through our vinyl. And we really want to leave about 1/4 inch all the way around our stitch line. We're going to do the same thing here. I like to come over, kind of tuck my scissors underneath and do a little snip. So you can kind of see how far from the vinyl I got. And then I'm going to just cutting the cotton. We are not cutting the vinyl. Cut up a little. Do the same thing over here. Cut up a little. So we're cutting away that cotton, but we are not cutting our vinyl. Same thing here. Cut up. Cut along the other way. There we go. So again, we're leaving about a 1/4 inch of material all the way around. Now what I like to do is just fold this down and then cut with my scissors parallel. I don't want them angled at all. I want them nice and straight. That way I know I'm not cutting through this vinyl here. And just take short little snips till we get down to the end. Just like that. Then we're going to turn it around this way and do the same thing. I like to give it a little fold. That usually keeps my fabric back. Just short little snips. There we are. We're going to grab our zipper pocket that we did earlier, along with our zipper pull. If you are not using a prepared zipper, we're going to install our pull. Okay, now what you want to decide is if you want your zipper pocket to open up this way, then you'll leave your pull over here on the left. If you want your zipper to open up this way, you will leave your zipper pull over here on the right. I want it to open up this way. Now, with the teeth of your zipper showing and the wrong side of your fabric showing, you want this to be laid out completely open. We are going to center our zipper panel right over here along the teeth. And then we are going to sew along the interior, again, going as close to that vinyl edge as possible. 1/8 inch seam allowance is good. You can add some double-sided tape on the top and the bottom and tape this in place so that way you know it won't shift. I'm just gonna hold it in place. Again, make sure that your zipper pockets are open on both sides. Then I'm going to stop and pull my thread through. You don't have to do this. You can just backstitch when you start and when you stop. I want to make sure that I'm not going to sew over those threads, so I'm just going to hold them in my other hand. There we go. My zipper pocket was not centered, and I can tell because I have a little bit more seam allowance over here than I do over here, which is fine. We'll work with what we got. I'm going to tie a knot. I like to just hit it with my lighter. Now we're going to bring our pocket piece down. This pocket piece aligns with the bottom of the bag, and we need to trim down this pocket piece. So we're just going to go ahead and cut this down so that it is nice and even with the top piece. There we are. So now we are going to leave the bottom of this pocket open so that we can turn it right side out. So we are going to sew down the sides. You should have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you were like me and did not center it, it might be a little bit of a struggle, but we're gonna make it work. So we are not sewing the panel here to the pocket. Instead, we are just sewing these two pieces to the pocket closed. So pull your panel out of the way, so straight down. And then we're going to pull this piece out of the way, and we are going to sew our 2 pocket pieces together. I don't know how I'm going to do this. Let's see. I might have to glue it down. I'm going to go as far as I can. Let's see if I have, no, I don't have the clearance. And that, friends, is what happens if you don't have it centered. No problem. I'm going to trim this side down just a little bit. My seam allowance, I'm going to trim that down where it should be 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to cinch the edge of that zipper with my lighter just so it doesn't unravel. I'm going to do the same thing over here, even though it's not sewn down. So right now, if you get into the pocket, you can get in and out. The only side that's not sewn is behind this overlay, which I'm not terribly worried about it, but what I am probably going to do is just add some glue in that little gap and just glue that down. Fabric glue would probably be good. I'm just going to use a little bit of E6000. So if you were like me and you did not line your pattern pieces up correctly, girl, same, boy, same. All right, now we're going to fold up the bottom of our pocket, which is going to give it a nice finished edge. When we turn the bag right side out through the zipper pocket, we're going to have to sew the pocket shut, so we want a nice finished edge on the interior. So I usually fold it up about 1/2 of an inch, make sure everything is nice and even, and then press it with my iron. Now I'm going to pull this pocket out of the way by just clipping it to the top. And I'm going to mark the center bottom of my panel. Just fold that all the way down until I get to the center, make a mark. I did the same thing here. You can tell this is navy and this is black. It's okay. All right, we're going to grab our inside lining and we're going to do the same thing. We are going to mark the center of the long edge on our bottom pattern piece. Add a little notch on that side. Add a little notch on this side. And let's start with our slip pocket. So we're going to lay our slip pocket panel right side up. We are going to lay our pattern piece wrong side up. We are going to match those center notches and then clip or pin them together. We're going to be sewing this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Just like the outside, we're going to trim the excess fabric in our corners. So again, you can either line up your ruler to your seam and just mark that all the way down, or you can just eyeball it. Remember, we are not cutting the bottom, we are only cutting this panel. So we're going to use the edge of the bottom as our guide and cut up. Same thing over here. Use the edge of this bottom to cut up and then follow that seam line all the way down. There we go. And then we'll do the exact same thing for our zipper panel. So lay that right side up. We're going to lay this piece that we just sewed wrong side up, and we're going to match our centers. And then we're going to sew this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to cut down our edges, just like before. Now the last step is just like the exterior, where you're going to line our sides up together and sew down the side. Flip them in place. Sometimes folding your bottom piece like this out of the way will allow you to lay these two down. There we are. Again, just like the outside, we're going to connect the bottom to the side. And we're just going to do that by pulling it open, lining up our edges like that, clipping it in place, and then sewing it down. Make sure that you are opening up your center seam, or your side seam, I should say. We're going to sew this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to go ahead and prep this side as well, just so it's ready for me. Now I like to trim down this little seam here to about 1/4 inch, just to get some of that extra fabric out of my lining. And then now you can, because this is cotton, you can open this up and you can iron this down, or you can do a little stitch on the top, a little basting stitch to hold that open. It's totally preference. I'm probably not going to do anything with it. Just gonna finger press it open. It should be fine by the time we finish. Okay, so that is our interior. We are going to set this aside and we are going to work on a couple other pieces of the outside of the bag and then put it all together. Now you want to grab your strap attachments as well as your 2 pieces of vinyl for your attachment strap backing. This is just a couple of pieces of scrap vinyl that I'm using. These have been interfaced already. I'm going to add a piece of double-sided tape right along the center. I'm going to start about a 1/2 inch from the top and then stop about a 1/2 inch from the bottom. That way we're not sewing through our tape when we sew these to the backing. I'm going to do the same thing for both pieces. Take that tape backing off. And then I'm just going to center this on the vinyl. We're going to sew around the outside, getting as close to the edge as possible. I usually use a 1/8 inch seam allowance. My sewing machine doesn't usually have an adjustment in speed. It's usually just really fast. So I just go as slow as I can around the corners. I will use my hand wheel. That way I know my seam is the same all the way around, or my seam allowance, I should say. I decided to go with the strap backing instead of just cutting out 2 pieces for the strap attachment. And the reason for that is that it gives me more space to grab onto when I'm sewing around this, so I don't have 2 of the exact same pattern pieces stuck together and I'm trying to make sure that everything is sewn right. So that's the reasoning behind the scrap vinyl as the backing. We're going to wind up cutting this down to size. But just having that extra material to grip onto just makes sewing and life so much easier. I don't normally backstitch when I start. I usually just sew right over those starting stitches and then backstitch to lock those in. So I'm just going to do this on both of them. There we go. Now I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut that attachment strap out, just getting right along the edge of this pattern piece. Now this particular piece of the bag will have a raw edge. If you would like to edge coat or paint the sides of it, you can absolutely do that. And I find that just really short cuts, not taking long cuts, usually helps me get as close as possible to the edge. There we are. So that is what our strap connector looks like. I'm just going to cut this one out as well. So our attachment straps are done. I'm going to set this aside. Next, we're going to go ahead and prepare our zipper for our zipper panel. So if you are using a continuous zipper, go ahead and add your pull. If you are using a prepared zipper, just wait a second and we'll catch up to you. So this is going to be the end of my zipper, and this is going to be the opening of it. From the opening side, I just measure down 3/4 of an inch. I just add a mark to each side, and then now I go ahead and open it up all the way. I'm going to fold the zipper down and pinch right at that mark. And while the zipper tape is held down in my fingers, I'm going to bring the zipper coil all the way up through the back. So that way it's perpendicular to the zipper tape. I'm going to add a pin just to hold that in place. Then I'm going to do the same thing over here. Fold right at that mark, pinch it with my fingers, and then just fold that coil right along the top so it's perpendicular. And I'm going to add a pin. And then now I'm just going to sew along the edge of the zipper tape to combine the flipped over side. And I just backstitch a couple times. And do the same thing over here. There we are. That's what it should look like. Now I'm just going to trim up the little bit of excess on the sides and then hit the side with my lighter. That's going to keep that edge from unraveling. That's what our prepared zipper should look like. Now we're going to work on our zipper panel. The first step is to draw a box along the inside. That's where we are going to be folding down to get our finished edge. Now there are 4 sides to our panel. The longest edge I'm going to refer to as the bottom. We have our 2 short sides, and then I'm going to call this the top. So to start, we're going to go in 3/4 of an inch from the short side. 3/4 inch from the top, and draw a line, and then 3/4 inch in from the other short side. And that is how we draw our box from the inside. So we have a 3/4 inch clearance here, 3/4 inch clearance here, and then 3/4 inch clearance here. Next, we're going to take our double-sided tape and we are going to put it on the outside of the line. And it's just going to go right up against where that line is. Now you can cut this and then start a new piece of tape. I like to just kind of fold it over. So I come up, I just fold my tape over and then keep going. Whatever is easiest for you. The only important thing is that it is right up against that line on the outside of the box. There we are. So that is what it should look like. I'm going to take the tape backing off. I'm going to start with my short side, so the edge of that vinyl should line right up with the line that we drew. I'm going to do the same thing over here on this short side. That should line right up with the line. And then I'm just going to fold over the top and then align the edge of that vinyl with the line. That should create a perfect corner if you cut your vinyl piece out correctly with the pattern piece. I did a lot of math to get this correct. There we are. So that is what it should look like once it's folded. And this is what the top is going to look like. Now our zipper is going to sit here along this folded side. The side that does not have a fold, that's going to be sewn into our seam. Now we're going to do the exact same thing with the other 3 panels for our zipper. I forgot to mention, while you're doing the other 3, if you'd like to add a little clip to the corners, that is going to be where I find it pulls away from the tape mostly. So if you just add a couple of clips, that'll just hold it in place. Oh, sorry. That'll just hold it in place while we're working on the other ones. I have all 4 pieces of my zipper panels prepped. I'm going to set 2 of those aside. I'm going to grab my 1/2 inch double-sided tape and I'm going to lay this down along the edge of the bottom or the folded side. I am going to leave a 1/4 inch clearance around the edges. That way we don't sew over too much double-sided tape. This double-sided tape is going to hold our zipper in the panel while we're sewing it together. You can totally omit this and just use clips to hold your zipper in place. I'm going to take one, remove the backing. I'm going to lay the folded edge onto the zipper teeth side up. I like to start my zipper about a 1/4 inch below the edge. So here's the edge. I like to start my curved edge of my zipper 1/4 inch below that. I'm going to get it nice and lined up so that it's even all the way across and then press that into the tape. Now if you notice the back of this, you see the rest of the 1/2 inch double-sided tape. The reason why I use a 1/2 inch instead of a 1/4 inch is because it allows me to align my back piece to my panel and then still use that tape to hold this down so it doesn't shift. So we can go ahead and do that now. I find that opening up my zipper just allows everything to line up a lot nicer. So I'm going to be aligning the bottom of this to the bottom of this. And if you cut your pattern pieces out evenly and did your folds correctly, everything should line up nice and perfect. I'm going to push that into the tape. And that is what the outside of the zipper panel looks like. Now there's usually a little gap right here because we don't have any tape holding it together. So what I will do is just add a little clip just to keep those together. I don't necessarily worry about the back part, just that opening. And then we're going to do the exact same thing over here. I'm going to take off my tape backing, line it up where the edge of that curve on the zipper is a 1/4 inch below the edge of my panel. press that into the tape. I like to also just press it in the back also. Now with that opened, I'm going to align the raw edge of this panel to the raw edge of this panel, making sure that's nice and lined up, and then press it into the tape. And then we can add some clips to the corner. Now what we're going to do is sew along the short edge, along the bottom edge that is on the zipper, and then back up the short edge with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to do the same thing on this side as well. There we are, that's what it should look like. And then we're going to do the same thing over here. And our zipper panel is all done. I did notice that when I laid my zipper panel down, I did not line it up perfectly. So this one came in a little bit further. Would I fix that if I was selling this bag? Yes. Am I going to fix it for the sake of the tutorial? No. But please keep in mind that when you are aligning your panels to your zipper, that they are matching on the outsides. Now we're going to work on our zipper in, which is the exact same idea as the zipper panel. We are essentially going to draw a box in the center, and we're going to get that box by just measuring 3/4 of an inch all the way around. There we are. I'm going to add a piece of double-sided tape along the outside of that box. And then we're going to fold over each edge to meet that box. Give that a good press, and then I'm going to remove the backing. And then we're just going to fold over each edge so that it lines up with that line that we drew, just like that. All of our corners should meet if we cut our pattern piece out correctly and then we cut out our vinyl correctly. There we are. So that's what it should look like folded up. So we have a nice finished edge on the outside of this. We are going to just fold this in half. Gonna add a clip to each corner and then just set this aside for a second. From the end of our zipper panel, we want 3 inches of zipper tape. And I'm gonna go ahead and trim this down. Gonna hit the edge with my lighter just so it doesn't unravel. And then now I'm just going to slide my zipper in right into the center. It's the same size, so it doesn't matter which way you fold it, it's gonna be the same size. Center that zipper. Add my clips back to the corner. And then we are going to sew around the edge of the rectangle with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Our zipper panel is all done. I am going to turn it so that the back of the zipper is showing. I'm going to mark the center of my panels. Now, because I know that that will not match up when I install it in my bag because they are off center, I am just going to find the center of one. And then I'm going to just match that to the other side. Now, if you installed yours correctly and they are the same size on this end as well as this end, you can just fold this in half, notch the centers. But I know that that won't line up for mine because of the way that I sewed it, which is tragic. I'm going to set this aside. We're going to grab our exterior panel. Now, if you have not marked the top of the center of your exterior, you can go ahead and do that now. The easiest way I find is just folding it where those seams meet, measuring it, and then just making a notch. You can also open this up, match your center seam, take that all the way down, and then notch out, and then add a notch to that. That's going to be the center. And then we can do the same thing over here. So we're going to match up our seam, follow that all the way down till we get to the center. And then when we put our seams back together, our center will match up perfectly. Okay, now we're going to take our zipper panel and we are going to lay it where the wrong side of the panel is showing. And that is going to, and then we're going to match up the center mark on our panel with the center mark on our exterior. Clip that in place. There we are. There's a couple of ways to get our other zipper panel to the other side. I'm going to show you both of them. You want to unzip it, and with the teeth still together, we're going to flip this up, flip it up again, and then flip it over one more time. And then that is going to go to the back. Similarly, you can unzip it, and then we can just slide our panel around. So making sure that this stays nice and straight, we're going to grab where the teeth are and bring it around the back. Both ways work. And then you want to just match up your center mark on your panel to the center mark on the zipper. Now we're going to just base this in place with the 1/8 inch seam allowance. Now we are going to turn our exterior so that the wrong side is showing. Get that pressed out. We're going to take our interior and turn it where the right side is showing. You want to open up your zipper pocket because we're going to be sewing these two together inside out. We're going to use that pocket to turn it right side out. My zipper pocket is open. If you want to make sure that your pulls are going the exact same way for both your pocket as well as your bag, when they are open, make sure that they are on the same side and go ahead and drop this in. We're going to start by lining up our side seams. Clip those in place. Same thing over here. And then I like to start on one side, come over here, and then meet in the middle. Now it's very important, if you try to clip your bag together with it looking like this, your interior is going to naturally be larger than your exterior, as you can see. So when you're clipping it together, you do not want a rounded edge, you want it nice and straight. So I just straighten it out, add a clip. I usually add about 2 on each side and then meet in the middle. So straighten it out. So we don't want it bowed out or your lining will be bigger. And if we have it bowed in, your exterior will naturally be bigger. So we want it just nice and straight. I'm gonna come over here and do the same thing. Straighten that out. And then coming back to the center. And that matches up perfectly. We're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. There we go. And now we are going to sew this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance all along the top. Just stitch and turn. Sorry, you can't see what I'm sewing. And then the bag gets in the way on the sides. Back to where we started. I like to start by pulling out my interior lining fabric. I'm going to go into my pocket, grab a hold of that corner and push it in. Do the same thing over here. And then grabbing that corner with my hand, I'm just going to pull that through the pocket and just push and roll. There's plenty of clearance for this bag to come out the pocket without any kind of stress to that zipper pocket. Once we get it out, I like to go ahead and press out my exterior first. Getting all my seams pushed. Side seam, I like to give that a little press. And we're going to tuck in our lining. Now I'm going to start by lining up these side seams. Sometimes if they don't come out completely, I just give it a little bit of a roll. Add a clip. Same thing on this side. Rolling it out, make sure that the exterior is completely pressed out and the interior is completely pressed in. All right, let's go ahead and first sew up our zipper pocket. I'm going to come in where we made that fold earlier, pull it together. You can clip it or pin it. I'm just going to go ahead and sew it. All right, I'm going to tuck that back in. I like to go ahead and tuck in my corners first. And then push that down. Zip up my pocket. Get my lining pressed out so everything is lined up. Okay, so the way that we are top stitching, we are leaving our zipper panel up while we do a top stitch. Sometimes your fabric on the interior can kind of roll up. We're going to be sewing from this view here. So to make sure that our exterior seam allowance is the same all the way across, while we're sewing, I'm going to be tugging my lining down this way while pulling my exterior out this way. That way I know everything lines up. That might sound a little bit weird, but once you start sewing, hopefully you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, our connectors are going to be covering up our sides, so I like to start and stop on a side, and that just hides the row of stitching, the duplicate rows of stitching. And I'll probably start here without the zipper in because I have a little bit more space. All right, so our sides are lined up. We don't have to worry about adjusting our interior and exterior. I'm sewing the top stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so once I get here, I like to grab the exterior, give that a little tug down, and then tug down my interior that way. So that way everything is lined up right along that seam. Stop, give it another little tug. The sides we don't really have to worry about because again we're able to access those and we clip those in place. Make sure you do not sew over your zipper end. All right, we're coming back. I'm going to go ahead and line this up, tug out my exterior, and then tug in my interior. So if you notice how your seam out here is sewn and I have the perfect seam allowance going all the way around, that's because I'm pulling my interior and exterior together. So if your seam is not perfect on the outside when you are top stitching, that is why. You want, let me make sure my needle is down. Hold on a second. You want to pull down your exterior while you are pulling down your interior. So I'm pulling out my exterior and I'm pulling down my interior. So that's just a little troubleshooting tip if your top stitch is not correct on the exterior. All right, we're coming back to the beginning. Back stitch. There we go. So that's what my top stitching looks like. Gonna trim my threads down. And then the last step of the bag is just to add our strap connectors, and then we'll talk a little bit about the shoulder strap. Okay, grab your strap connectors if you haven't already done so. We're going to fold it in half and slide on our D-ring. Now the flat bar on the D-ring is going to be on the inside, which means that the rounded edge of the D-ring is going to be on the outside. I'm going to line those up and then clip them together, just in the center. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. The next step is to install our rivets. Now this has 3 rivets. We have 2 on the bottom and then 1 at the center top. I don't really care where you put your rivets. The only thing that I want you to make sure is that it's in the furthest bottom of the corners, right in front of your stitching. So when you punch through your holes for your rivets, you do not want to punch through that stitching that you made. Just get as close as you can. Now, for those people who need an actual measurement or they can't sleep at night, I will give you one. I'm going to move my clip up here to the side. Now we are going to come up from the bottom 1/4 of an inch, and then we are going to come in 3/8 of an inch on both sides. Right here. Right here. So there's where I marked my holes. Now the top hole does matter. We are going to come down 1 inch from the top fold, and we are going to add a mark to the center. There we are. So those are our holes, or our marks for our holes. With this being folded, I'm going to punch through all 3 holes. We're going to do the exact same thing to this one, but I'm going to show you how to install this to the bag, and that way you don't have to watch me do the same thing over and over again. We can go ahead and remove our clips. So with our connector folded and the bottom edges meeting, I'm going to pinch the top where that connector is. So I'm holding the connector, but these two are not together. I'm going to slide this over the side of my panel, and I'm going to make sure that that center seam aligns with the center of the attachment. And then now I'm just grabbing the actual panel along with the attachment. You want a little bit of clearance for your hardware, so as long as the bottom of that touches the top of the tote, you're perfectly fine. Now what we're going to do is we're going to transfer the holes from our connector to our actual bag. It doesn't matter what kind of pin you use, your rivet's going to go here and it's going to cover up the pin marks. So with that laid down, we're just going to go inside of each of those holes, add a little mark. There we are. This one's not that visible, I'm just going to redraw it. We're going to poke through all of our holes. You want to make sure that your interior lining is nice and flat and it's not bunched up when you're poking through your holes. We're going to grab our attachment again. I like to start with the top center rivet. So I'm just going to put that one in. We're going to poke that through the hole on the exterior, making sure that our hardware is still on. We're going to flip this over and match up that hardware or that post with that hole at the very top, and then add the rivet backing. There we go. And then I'm going to come back over here, and then we're just going to do it for the rest of the holes. So pick which side, doesn't matter. Go through that, go through the exterior and the interior. I like to flip it over so that way I can look at it here. Oh, that came off. And then just thread it through our opening, and then add our cap. Just like that. And then we're just going to do the exact same thing for the last one. Poke it through your strap connector, poke it through your exterior and your interior. Sorry about that. Find it on the inside lining. And then your cap. Now we are just going to set those rivets. And that is how you add your strap attachment to the outside of the bag. We're going to do the exact same thing over here. So this is going to be our freestyle way of doing it. I'm just going to eyeball where to put my connectors, except for at the top. Again, making sure that our connector is clipped together and that it perfectly lines up the front and the back. We're going to poke through. So with everything still lined up and folded, I'm going to grab the top where I am gripping the bar, take my clip off. That way I can slide this over, make sure it's nice and centered. I have a tiny bit of clearance where the metal of our D-ring touches the top of the bag. Making sure it's centered. Going to just put my pin in and make those holes. Let me use a red one so it might be a little bit easier to see. And even if you put these in the wrong place, if you draw them in the wrong place, that's okay. Nobody's going to see what's underneath this connector. So if you have to move it over a little bit, that's totally okay. Because again, once the connector is on, you're not going to see anything that's been marked underneath your connector, so don't stress out. All right, here are my marks. You can kind of see them a little bit better in red. Making sure that my lining is nice and straight on the inside and it's not bunched up. I'm gonna poke through those holes. Now you want to decide which side of this goes on the outside and which side of this goes on the inside. It's totally up to you. Here's where I started and stopped my stitching, so I'm actually going to put that on the inside. So here I'm going to put my top post in, line it up with the top hole that I made, push it through my lining so that I can see it, fold over my connector and get that hole lined up. Push it through till I see my post, and then grab my backing. Now you can set it at this point before you move to the other two. The only thing is that if for some reason your measurements are off, you're gonna have to figure out a way to get that rivet out, which is why I wait until the very end to set all of my rivets. Next, we're gonna come down here. Again, it doesn't matter what side you go to next. I'm going to put it through my connector, find that hole on my exterior, push it through to my lining until I see it come out, and then put that through the hole on the connector, add my backing, and then just do the last one the exact same way. That's what it looks like on the outside. There's my post, and it goes right over my hole. And I'm going to set them. There we are. So our bag is all done now. We just have to make our shoulder straps. At the beginning of the video, I gave you a little bit of a heads up as far as how long you can cut your shoulder straps if you don't want to go based off of the pattern piece measurements. If you did not watch that, I would encourage you to watch that before you do your next step. If you've already cut out your shoulder strap based off of the pattern piece measurements, meet me back and we'll go ahead and sew that up. Now what we have to do is finish our shoulder strap. I have my strap cut out. I drew a line down the center, which is the first step, and you also want to grab your vinyl strap-in template. All we're going to do is align the end of our strap template to the end of our strap. And we are going to trace out our sides. Gonna do the same thing on both of the ends. This is where everything gets folded up so that we have a nice, perfect finished end to our shoulder strap. I'm going to cut this out right along that line. I'm going to do the other one. So we have the ends of our strap prepped. Now what we want to do is draw a line connecting these two short lines. And this is just going to tell us where we're going to fold up this end piece and where it's going to stop. Normally I just run a piece of 1/2 inch double-sided tape along the center of my strap. For this one though, I am going to use a piece of 1/4 inch double-sided tape right along the bottom. This is just going to make sure everything stays in place while I'm sewing my strap together, because we're going to fold this a couple different times. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a piece of 1/2 inch double-sided tape to that center line. So I'm going to start at the end of my 1/4 inch double-sided tape and then just take that all the way down. And then I'm just going to stop that right above the 1/4 inch double-sided tape. Going to take off the tape backing. On all 3 pieces. Here's where the magic happens. We're going to start by aligning the edge of our strap to that line that we drew. Just like that. I'm going to turn this around and do the same thing over here. Just like that. And then now we are going to fold the edge of our strap to meet that center line. I like to stop the tiniest amount away from that line. Now the way that I designed the pattern piece, your edges should all meet up without any overlapping. And that's just going to reduce the bulkiness when we are sewing our shoulder strap together. So the pieces should fit perfectly. I'm going to go ahead and continue folding this all the way down and then do the exact same thing on the other side. I kind of like to stop a couple inches short. Fold that over and then meet it. And that's why I add that 1/4 inch double-sided tape here, because if not, we only have this amount of tape in the center holding it down, and I want everything to lay nice and flat, knowing that my pieces all meet up perfectly. And then we're just going to flip it over and do the exact same thing on this side. So I'm going to start with my long edge, bring that to the center, just leaving the tiniest gap. Just like that. All of our pieces fit perfectly. Stopping a few inches short of the end. I'm going to go ahead and tackle this edge. And then meet back in the wherever I stopped, just like that. So our vinyl should be one seamless piece of folded material. And then now we're just going to fold it in half once more. I like to clip whatever end that I'm not starting with, just to kind of keep those together. So I'm going to start over here. You can also clip this. I mean, heck, you could clip the entire thing down. I don't like to, I just like to hold it together while I'm sewing it. We're going to sew along the entire exterior of this with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Because I don't clip mine in place, I just have to keep repositioning it, making sure it's folded. Our edges should line up. And when I come back to where I clipped it in place, I'm not sure if you can see that. I'm just going to remove the clip. And then come right back down. There we go. Our shoulder strap is sewn up on all 4 of those sides. This is what it should look like. Now there's a couple of different ways that you can attach your shoulder strap to your bag. You can thread it right onto your D-ring, and you can go ahead and add a rivet to secure it in place. You can also thread it through a lobster clasp, and you can rivet that in place, and that's going to make your shoulder strap removable. So decide whichever way you want to attach your strap. If you are using the lobster clasp, you just want to thread that on. You want to see about 1 inch of material on the folded side, and then just put a rivet right in the center. I am going to do it as the pattern shows, which is just connect it directly to my D-ring. Thread that through, fold it over. Again, we want 1 inch of folded material, and then we're going to just punch through both layers of our strap and add a D-ring. Not a D-ring, a rivet. Reposition, make sure that everything is lined up. Add my rivet back. I'm going to go ahead and set this in place. There we are. Now what I'm going to do is just take this all the way down. I want to make sure that there are no twists or turns in my strap. And then I'm going to go ahead and thread it through this D-ring the exact same way. So when it's folded, I want to make sure that there is 1 inch of folded vinyl. Punch through both of those right at the center. Grab my rivets. Now, before setting this rivet, it's always a good idea to lay your bag completely straight to make sure that there are no twists and everything is lined up before you secure the rivet. A rivet is a hard thing to remove, trust me. Now your vinyl tote bag is all done. I really hope that you love this pattern. If you tried one of the styles, like the full size, try the half, try the block. They are so much fun, and after you do it a couple of times, they really come together quite quickly. I would love to see pictures of your finished bags. Please feel free to tag me. Thank you so much for purchasing this pattern.